Okay, on the first 2 days of your clinical rotation, I want you to focus on 5 things. 4 of them will be, quite easy. They're just real short things to think about. But the fifth one, I want you to write down, I want you to make some observations and write them down. So when the technologist over the first couple of days is doing his or her tests, I want you to observe what they're doing. And I have the workflow broken down into several parts. We'll take them one by one. But you can print. There's actually 12 sections. You can print each one of those, and I've given you some. I've given you some room to write notes. But so the first week or the first 2 days of your rotation, just write down the notes and then study them a little bit. So when it's your turn to start doing patients the second week, you'll kind of know the flow of the workflow of the lab. And then you can kind of emulate that so it'll be a little easier for you and for the site, technologist. Um, so let's get started here. Let's just go over the first 4 things here real quick. So what you want to do when you get there is you want to try to find a place where you can, you're kind of your own personal space. So you can plug your computer in and you can study and, during downtime and relax when you have, a few moments. And then also you may want to find a place to store your valuables or keep them stay safe, whether in a locker or perhaps they may have lockers or they may have like a locking drawer or desk or something like that. And then but just to let you know, not all labs are really that big, and they may not have space for you for your own place to sit. So you may have to huddle together at a desk with someone else, or you may have to sit in a chair, near the desk, utilizing another chair for your computer. I don't know. But some labs may be very small and there may not be a place for you to sit. But I think if you ask the site supervisor, if there's a place where you can sit, while you're there, hopefully they will have some place, um, kind of mapped out for you so you can do that. So that's one thing to think about. It's pretty important to have a space to sit for your own. Um, go over the handbook information with your clinical instructor, and that would be the head tech at the place where you're going, at the site where you're going. So I think really all you have to do, I think they're going to have the handbook with the uh, we'll give them I guess a handbook, but what I want you to do is go over some of the sheets with them. So because you're going to have to be graded, and you're going to actually have to have a timesheet and an EEG documentation form for them to fill out. So this is the evaluation form, and we're going to have them fill this out at 4 weeks and 8 weeks. So you can just show them this form, this evaluation form, and to have get them familiarized with it. And then also there's this timesheet on the left, and you can see just date, time in, time out, and then have them sign it. And then on the right is probably the most important one. It's your EEG documentation form. So you can have them, or actually you fill out, every time you do a patient, you fill it out or add the patient in there. And then when the sheet gets full, you can have them sign it on the bottom and date it, and then keep store that or keep that form safe, because if you lose it, then you'll have to go back and back into the database and figure out all the tests that you've done. So make sure you don't lose that form after it's filled out and signed. A couple of students asked me about items to do the testing, and so the site should provide you with all your prep supplies, like your pace and in the little tabs that you put over the electrodes and that sort of thing. The Q-tips. If you like a specific measuring tape, you could probably bring that with you. And also bring a supply box so you can put your supplies in it. But anyway, most labs typically have a cabinet or a closet with supplies in it. So the site coordinator should, go over that with you and give you a lab tour to kind of show you where everything is. Okay. And I just want you to, when you get there, I want you to familiarize yourself with how their patients are scheduled. So if you're in an outpatient lab, the administrative assistant is usually the one who schedules the EEGs, and they're typically scheduled at set times. So I put an example at Sharp Rees Steely. They schedule their EEGs at 9, 10:30, and 12:30. So they allow for an hour and a half for each test. So you want to kind of figure out that, the time intervals between each patient. And then at the Sharp Rees Steely site, the technologist comes in at 8:30, and he preps for the first half hour and prepares the patient information. And then he gets a half-hour break between 12 noon and 12:30, and then he does his her last patient at 12:30 to 2. In an outpatient setting, typically the slots are always filled, just because most outpatient clinics draw from several neurologists in the health system, so they usually have a steady flow of patients. So if you're at an outpatient clinic, you could probably expect to be pretty busy, unless there's a cancellation. So if there's a cancellation, then you may have some downtime to study or pull up EEGs and read on the database and things like that. Now the inpatient lab, the technologist usually schedules the EEGs, and usually in the electronic medical record, there's usually a bin or a queue where all the orders from the hospital units will end up. So a doctor or neurologist could order a test on any unit in the hospital, but it'll all end up in what's called the inpatient queue. And so in the morning, the technologist, when he gets there or she gets there, they can open up the EMR and go into that queue, that inpatient queue, and see what patients are in the queue for the day. Now, the volume in the inpatient EEG lab will vary. At Scripps Encinitas, some days we might not have any EEGs, and some days we might have 5. So it varies a lot, and it really depends on the number of neuro patients that the hospital has at the time, and it depends on how active the neurology team is in ordering EEGs. And at larger hospitals, especially those with neurointensive care units and long-term monitoring units, will usually have order more inpatient EEGs, just because they're more focused on focused on the neuro patients. Um, but in general, when you're working in an inpatient setting, you should try to, schedule the EEGs as soon as they come in. And the reason I say that is because, if you're working an 8-hour shift, you could get EEGs anytime during the day. And what can happen is, like, neurology patients, since they're in the hospital, they're a little more sick, they're sick, and they're more likely to have acute or what are acute neurological changes or sudden changes in their neurological status. So the neurologist might go rush over to the room and evaluate the patient and decide they need an EEG at the end of your shift, right? So 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 you may get an EEG real late in the day. And also, the hospital setting, they're always getting new patient admissions, especially through the emergency department, that may require stat EEG. So a patient may come in having seizures. So they may order a stat right at the end of your shift. So basically, you don't want to sit on inpatient EEGs. You don't want them to build up. So as soon as they come into the inpatient queue, you want to get them scheduled, and then you want to go do them do them quickly. You can typically get an inpatient EEG done in about an hour and a half. So you can schedule them on about, like an hour and a half intervals. But again, you don't want to sit on them, because if you take 2 or 3 hours to do a patient, it's by that time it's the afternoon, and you could get 2 more orders at the end of the day, and they may be stats, and the doctor will say, well, hey, I need them done. You're going to have to stay overtime or something like that. So it's always a really, really good plan to get them completed as soon as they come into the queue. I also put that prolonged EEGs usually take longer to hook up, because you typically have to glue the electrodes on the head. And you also may have to call like a monitoring service like Corticare, and that takes a while for them to remote into the machine to start monitoring. And also, sometimes you'll get an order, and then you'll try to schedule it, but the patient is out at another test. And this happens quite frequently in the inpatient setting. So you may want to do a test at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something like that, but you won't be able to get into the patient till 11:45, because they may be at MRI or something like that. So there are all sorts of variables in the inpatient setting that you have to watch out for. But in general, you want to get them scheduled as soon as they come in and get them done. So so that's kind of the difference. The inpatient lab, the EEGs are coming in at all different times, whereas the outpatient lab, they're scheduled at set times. Okay, most importantly now, as I said at the beginning, the first 2 days of your clinical rotation should be for observation only. And so watch the technologist and make notes on the following 12 items. And you can print these out, because I've left some space for notes. So I want you to take notes and write down what the technologist is doing at each step of the way. So if you look at these 12 items, it's actually the flow from the start of the EEG to the end of the EEG. So there's several different steps in there that you can look at and and kind of watch what the technologist is doing. So it'll give you some information on how the technologist plans his or her workflow. And then when you start the 3rd week, you can kind of, like I said before, emulate or copy the workflow. So it'll make it easier for the technologist. Um, and then once you get really good at it, then you can start making changes. Like if you want to change something in the protocol, then you can just kind of modify the protocol a little bit. Um, so let's go over each one by one, and then you can. And I wrote down a few notes, like on the first one here. Observe how the technologist collects patient information for the EEG file. So I've given you some things to, some ideas on what to observe. Okay, so 1 through 4. So, so when the technologist gets in the morning, they're gonna figure out who their patients are probably first thing. So the information that's gathered on the patient is usually gotten from the EMR, or the electronic medical record. So the technologist will go in and find the schedule and click on the patient's name, and then the technologist may copy and paste and print the history, or may print the information in actually item number 3, or they may write the information down on a text sheet. But the information that's usually gathered for the EEG file, now all this information is actually transferred into the EEG file. So the pretty bare minimum information should be the name, the date of birth, the medical record number, the referring doctor, and then of course you want to write some history down or copy some history, and then you want to get the medications. And then there's some other information that they may put into the EEG, and that would be the EEG number for the database. They may put in the reading doctor. There may be a place for like handedness and patient location. Like if you're doing an inpatient EEG, you want to put the location of where the patient is into the EEG file. So the technologist, this is really your first observation should, probably going to be that the technologist is going to want to get information on the patient and take this into the lab with them before, when they start prepping the lab for the EEG. Or they'll take this with them to the inpatient, into the room where the patient is going to be in the hospital, into the inpatient setting. They would take the information with them into the room with the EEG machine. The second item is observe how the technologist sets up the outpatient or inpatient rooms for the EEG. Okay, so here's some things that 1 through 6, there's 6 items there you can that might give you an idea of what to look for. So how does a technologist lay out the head measurement and electrode application supplies for the test? What linens does the technologist use for the test? Okay, and where do they get the linens? Okay, so that's important too, because each floor in a hospital will have a linen room. So you have to figure out where those are, and if it's an outpatient clinic, they probably have either a storage space for linen inside the lab or in a linen closet somewhere in the clinic. So observe what kind of linens they use. What position does the technologist put the bed, the gurney, or chair for hookup? For example, raising the bed or gurney into a comfortable position for hookup. In the inpatient setting, how does the technologist manage tubing, IV lines, and power cords in relation to the headbox cable? Now that's very important, and I'm going to put out another PowerPoint on this, but you have to kind of try to isolate your headbox cable from all the other lines and power cords in the room so you don't get 60 cycle. So I'm going to put out a little video on how to try to cut down on the amount of 60 cycle that you get in your recordings because that's, you know, that's the number one artifact that you're going to see. So it's a real important one to try to eliminate when you can. So see if the technologist is doing anything with the cables, or kind of isolating that cable that goes from the head box to the machine. Um, what position is the machine in relationship to the patient? Does the technologist start the EEG file and turn on the impedance meter before hooking up? So we've tried that in class, right? We start the recording, and then we turn on the impedance meter, and then we start our hookup. So does the technologist do that? So these are some examples of what you may want to look for in your observations, and then, you know, make notes of what the technologist actually does. Okay, and you can compare them to, you know, the possible observations above. Let's go to the next one. Observe how so once the lab is set up, and the technologist starts the EEG file, he's gonna go get his patient. Either he's gonna go out to the waiting room in an outpatient clinic and take the patient into the lab, or he or she's gonna, you know, push the EEG machine into the inpatient room. So observe, how does the technologist greet and identify the patient? How does the technologist explain the procedure to the patient? How does the technologist confirm that the patient understands the procedure and allows for questions? Okay. So it's very important to, you know, number one, it's very important to identify the patient. So you want to somehow, you know, you call their name, and they you know, they stand up and walk over, and you can say, are you so and so? But also you may want to say, okay, what's your date of birth? So you just want to definitely make sure that you have the right patient. And if you're in an inpatient setting, every inpatient in a hospital should have a wristband around their wrist. So you want to take your patient information, and you want to walk up to the patient, and you want to, you know, find the identification badge at the wrist and compare it to your patient information. Okay, so watch the tech and see how you know, he or she handles this. And then again, just write the notes down, on what the technologist does for this aspect of the recording or test. Observe how the technologist measures, applies electrodes, and reduces impedances. Okay, so here, just make notes on how they measure. You can, if they do the sagittal plane, just put sagittal plane. You know, if there's anything different than what you do, just jot it down. You know, anything different in electrode application or reducing impedances. So just make notes on that. As we talked before in class, if you're going to change your measurement technique, make sure it will at least keep your accuracy, you know, steady, or improve it. So don't change your measurement technique unless, you know, for ease and speed. But just change it if it's going to make your application more accurate. And when I'm saying accurate, you know, we want good distances, even distances between our electrodes. Observe what recording protocols are being used. So does the technologist do mechanical, biocal, check impedances at the beginning and end of the test? What montages do they use? When and what do they annotate? When do they do HV and photic? And then is there any other additional things the technologist adds to the recording? And so you could just jot those down. This one actually would be very important for you because you know you're going to be recording, so you want to kind of do what the technologist has done, you know, in your observation. So you may want to make really good notes for this one. Observe what patient, technical, and record information the technologist enters into the files. Okay, so that patient information that the technologist collected first off, how much of that does he actually put into the EEG file? Okay, because I think you'll be surprised that some technologists put a lot of stuff and some technologists don't put so much. So just write down how much information they put in, like just jot down how much they put or what fields they fill in, and what patient does what patient history do they put in, how much is it really, you know, lengthy, is it just a line or two, what other information do they put in, technical information. So let's say, you know, do they put the impedance readings in the file somewhere, like less than 10 k ohms or less than 5 k ohms? Where would they put documentation of craniotomy scars? Or if they added additional electrodes like eye leads or EKG, where did they state that inside the test? They may not, and that's fine, but just kind of watch what they put in, so you can do the same. Where does the technologist enter record information in the file? For example, if something unusual happened during the recording, like a seizure, where did they document that inside the file? Or if there's behavioral changes like agitation, where did they put the state changes inside the EEG file? Or if there was frequent movements, the patient was uncooperative, or there was electrode issues, where do they put that in the file? Again, they may not, they may think that just the documenting it or annotating it on the record is good enough, and that's fine too. But if they if they do enter in additional information, then go ahead and note that. And then is there any other additional things the technologist adds to the EEG file? So this is going to be probably a really important thing to really learn before you start too. So documenting, the patient information and history and such is a very important task in the test. So, okay, so, and then observe how the technologist cleans the patient's head after the electrodes are removed. Okay, so what does the technologist use, or what method do they use to clean off the paste off the scalp? How thorough does the technologist clean the head? Does the technologist offer a comb? Does the technologist explain how to clean the scalp and hair at home? So just make a note of how they basically get the patient cleaned up and on their way. Observe how the technologist explains how and when the patient will receive the results of the EEG. So oftentimes patients will ask, when will I get my results? Hold on here a second. This is getting cut off a little bit at the top. Let me see if I can pull that up. There we go. Okay. A lot of times the patients, right when they're leaving, they'll say, well, when am I going to get my results? So does the technologist explain, who's going to read their results? They could say something like, oh, the neurologist, will read your test. Or if they were referred to by a doctor who actually reads the EEG, they could say, oh, your doctor so-and-so will read your results, you know, with probably within the next day or two. You can say something like that if you know that for sure. And you kind of get a sense after you're at a clinic for a while how quickly the neurologists actually read. Um, does the technologist explain who to contact for the results? Does the technologist give an estimate on when the results may be available? So that, you know, usually the the uh, the patients usually want to know how long it's going to take. They'll say, well, how long will it take before I get results? And they also actually want to know who do I contact. So see if the technologist actually explains that, any of that to the patients. Maybe they won't, and that's okay. But it's a good thing to learn, because you know, you want to like, you know, you just want to let your patients know, because a lot of times they're just really worried about the outcome of their test. So if they can, you know, if they can get an idea of how long it's going to take, it kind of gives them, you know, kind of gives them sort of a structure to go with. So, um, observe how the interpreting physician is contacted to read the EEG. So, most of the time, the physician's going to be contacted through the electronic medical record. So basically, what the technologist, and you can watch your technologist and see how they actually, how the physician knows that there's an EEG to be read. And typically, they'll go into the medical record, click on the patient, and they'll enter in some information. Then they'll hit like submit or okay. And what will happen is the information will zip out to the reading doctor, and he'll get the notice in his in some sort of inbox that this EEG is ready to read. So that's typically how I think most hospitals and clinics do it now. However, the the technologist may actually contact the physician on his own, maybe via email or text or something like that. I don't know. Um, but but observe that or try to figure that out. So so if you have to ask the technologist how they know, then just, you know, ask them, and then write down again how it works at the clinic or hospital that you're at. This is an important one here, especially when you're busy. Observe how the technologist transitions from one patient to the next patient. Okay, so how does the in an inpatient room or the outpatient, how does the technologist lower, reposition, and lock the bed before going on to the next inpatient? So you want to make sure, like, well, when you leave an inpatient room, the technologist should put everything back the way it was. So you'll notice that the technologist will probably lower the bed. You should always lower the bed when you leave the room. You don't want to leave it up in the air. You want to reposition it back into the wall, and underneath the overhead light, and lock the bed. So observe how the technologist does that. Does the technologist wipe down the machine before leaving the inpatient room? Are the soiled linens deposited? How does the technologist clean the outpatient bed, gurney, and tray table? What does the technologist Where does the technologist keep the fresh measurement and application supplies? So do they have, do they have them like in a little cabinet in the outpatient room where they can just easily open the door and grab new supplies for the next patient? How do they transition, from cleaning up the lab and then laying down fresh materials to do the next patient? Because that's really important, because you want to get a good workflow going, so you're not taking 15-20 minutes to turn over from one patient to the next. You want to make it like as short as possible, especially when you're busy. Um, and then does the technologist have the patient information ready for the next patient? So in the morning when they come in, they typically, a good strategy is to print all your patient information for the whole day, so you have it, so you can just go from one patient to the next without stopping at the computer let's say you have, you know, 4 patients. You don't want to stop at the computer 4 times and print out the information on each patient. You can just do it all at once in the morning as you're doing your prep before you start. So observe how the technologist does this transition from one patient to the next. Observe how the technologist cleans reusable electrodes. So some sites are going to have disposable ones. So this, if you have a site where everything's disposable, then you don't have to really worry about this. You can just write down disposable onto your notes. But if they do reuse them, how do they? What type of disinfection method do they use? Okay, so just write that down. And that's it. So I just want to note that please make good notes. I think it's going to be real important because it'll get you off to a really good start in your clinicals if you can get the technologist's routine down. And also, I want to have a discussion in class about how the technologists do these steps, and it'd be really nice for us to talk about it in one of our classes, and it'd be interesting to see if there's anything different than from what we learned in class. So so that's the end of this module. Thank you.